Hey guys, it's Libby. Welcome to the Better Late Than Never Bard Book Club video for Henry IV Part 2. I have my bookshelves set up behind me, but I have not organized the rest of my house enough in order to have enough space to have a chair or enough room to stand and then a camera in front of the shelves. So we're still on the couch for now, but at least you can admire at an angle. So, Henry IV Part 2. As with all Bard Book Club videos, I highly recommend reading or at least seeing the play before watching this video, because you will not understand what I'm talking about. But for this video, not only should you have read Henry IV Part 2, but also the two previous plays in the tetralogy, Richard II and Henry IV Part 1, because I'm going to be referencing not only those plays, but comments that I made in my videos about those plays. So if you haven't watched my earlier videos for those plays, do so. And I do think that this video will be a little bit on the shorter side, at least when it comes to Bard Book Club videos, so like under 40 minutes, because I don't think this play is particularly difficult to understand. Most of the scenes, there either isn't a lot of there, or the scene speaks for itself. Like, I don't think you guys need me to explain the "I know thee not, old man" speech, because it's just, yeah. And then one last thing before I give you a plot synopsis, and that is a mea culpa. I should have told you in the last video, but I forgot. And that is that Falstaff is not real. He is a fictional character who was made up by Shakespeare. So keep that in mind as you are reading either these plays or actual histories about the life of Henry V. So this synopsis is not by any means going to cover all of the things that happen in this play, and that's because these synopses, don't get used to them, I'm only doing them for the history plays, and that's because their plots, especially their political plots, are both confusing and very important. So I want to make sure that you have a grasp on them, because they're not only important for their own play, but also for all the other plays going forward. There is one very important event that has happened between Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, which is discussed in this play, but we do not directly see. And that is that the Lord Chief Justice arrested Prince Hal for a short period of time. But when we start this play, we have the Earl of Northumberland, one of the rebels, learning at first that his son has killed Prince Hal, but then actually no, it's that Prince Hal has killed his son, which he's very upset about, and he vows to redouble his efforts in his fight against King Henry. Meanwhile, the king remains despondent that Prince Hal will ever make a good king, and this is particularly pressing because he knows that he is ill and going to die soon. Prince John, the second oldest son of the king, basically defeats the rebellion in one scene, which Northumberland is not in. The main rebels he's defeating there are the Archbishop of York and Mowbray, son of Mowbray from Richard II, who hopefully you still remember, even though it's been about 15 or 14 acts since we've seen him. The king isn't able to fully celebrate the defeat of the rebellion because he's too sick and he has to go lie down. Prince Hal comes back to find his father asleep and seemingly dead, so he takes the crown, which he believes is now his, and leaves. Then it turns out the king was not quite dead. He wakes up, says, "Where is my crown?" finds it on his son, and then yells at him because that is not how succession is supposed to work, as he would know, as he is a usurper himself. But then Prince Hal makes a great speech about saying that he wasn't trying to steal the crown. He thought that his father was already dead, and he was actually very sad about this. The king feels better and then immediately dies. Now Prince Hal is King Henry V. At his coronation, he vows that he will show everyone that he is reformed. He vows that he will protect his brothers and not kill them. Pay particular attention to Prince Humphrey, who I think is the third oldest of the brothers. He will become very important in the Henry VI plays. He also, to everyone's surprise, decides to forgive the Lord Chief Justice for arresting him and makes him one of his closest advisors. Then he is accosted by Falstaff and he rejects him, showing that he is now a goodly king. And that's the play. Obviously there's not a lot of there, and a lot of these scenes are just like Falstaff doing some stuff in the tavern or with just the shallow, and it doesn't add up to much unless you like some of Falstaff's speeches and soliloquies. Some scholars think that Shakespeare did not intend to write a part 2 to Henry IV, and that's why he used up all of the actual historical material in part 1, and he just had to play with the scraps that were left and then add a bunch of filler in order to make this play. That may explain some of what I consider to be the unevenness of the writing. As I mentioned in my last Bard Book Club video, these two Henry IV plays are the most uneven plays to me in all of Shakespeare's work. The parts that are good are really good, and the parts that are bad make you want to sleep. But none of that means that we cannot think deep thoughts about this play. So let's try to do that. Let's try to turn the problems with this play into things to explore. The first one is that in contrast to the last play, which seemed to have too many main characters with our 3 Henrys, this play seems to not have enough main characters. Falstaff actually has the most lines in the entire play, but he is surely not our protagonist. I mean, he's silly and doesn't have an arc. The king can't be our protagonist because he's dead in Act 4 and doesn't have anything to do in the last act. He also doesn't do that much. He mainly delivers speeches, which are like deliciously good, but he doesn't do that much to do with regards to the plot. And then Prince Hal isn't really in it that much, at least before the last act. He does spend a fair bit of time on stage, but he's quiet for most of that, and a lot of the scenes that he's in, at least before Act 5, are dominated by either his father or Falstaff. But maybe that is not a problem. Maybe that is intentional. Oh, Will, I will always find ways to make you look good. So what I think Prince Hal could be doing in this play, as we see him moving farther away from Falstaff and closer towards the advice of his father, is listening to his father's advice, which is interestingly also the advice, or not really advice, relating to the complaint that Richard II made back when he was still alive. Do you guys remember in my last video when I brought up how both Richard II and Henry IV make speeches about how the other was too available with the common people? Well, I did not do that for no reason. Prince Hal is here making himself less available to the common people, which interestingly does include us, the audience. We've also got 2 spheres in which the play is occurring, the court and the tavern, and then the countryside with Justice Shallow. And Prince Hal doesn't really belong in either of those spheres. He's decided he doesn't really want to hang out in Eastcheap anymore. It seems like all of the time he spends there, he spends talking to Poins, saying like, I feel bad about being here and I think I should maybe be in court. But he also doesn't really belong in court because his dad does not love him. And you know, that's a good enough segue. I was going to wait until later, but let's just eat our dessert now and talk about Act 4, Scene 5. It's so good, guys. You may have gathered that this is not my favorite Shakespeare play. It is not in the top 5 Shakespeare plays for me. I don't even think it's in the top 10. But this scene may be the greatest scene that Shakespeare wrote. This is the one where Prince Hal finds his father seemingly dead, takes the crown, that whole shenanigan. And I mean, on the one hand, I do just want to read it all to you, but on the other hand, I do not want to cry on YouTube. So I highly suggest, if you did not do it the first time you read it, read the 3 speeches that the first one that the king says to the prince, and then the prince's response, and then the king's response to that. Read them out loud, because they are so good. I just want to read a piece of one of them because it's really a key to this play and a key to the tetralogy as a whole. So I'm gonna start about a third of the way through the king's first speech around line 100. Thou hast stolen that which some few hours were thine without offense, and at my death thou hast sealed up my expectation. Thy life did manifest thou lovest me not, and thou wilt have me die assured of it. Thou hidst 1,000 daggers in thy thoughts, which thou hast whetted on thy stony heart, to stab at half an hour of my life. What? Canst thou not forbear me half an hour? Get thee gone, and dig my grave thyself, and bid the merry bells ring to thine ear that thou art crowned, not that I am dead. Let all the tears that should bedew my hearse be drops of balm to sanctify thy head. Only compound me with forgotten dust. Give that which gave thee life unto the worms. Pluck down my officers, break my decrees, for now a time is come to mock at form. Harry V is crowned, up vanity, down royal state. And this should remind you of that scene from Richard II, where Richard transfers the kingship from himself to Henry IV, saying things like, with mine own tears I wash away my balm, with my own hands I give away my crown. And that was a very traumatic scene for Henry. He views his own kingship as illegitimate, and he thinks that the only way that a true king can be restored is to have one correct process of succession. So it will go from him to his firstborn son through the laws of primogeniture, and then even though he can never be a real king, he can only be a usurper, his son, because he succeeds properly, will be able to be a real king. But what he thinks his son has just done is completely ruin this plan when it was so close to going off without a hitch. He was so close to dying. He kind of just wants to die so that you can have this successful succession. He said at the end of Richard II that he wanted to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and as I mentioned in my Richard II video, there was a prophecy that he was going to die in Jerusalem, so he was kind of saying, I want to go die already so that we can have this correct succession. But if his son seizes the crown before the previous king is dead, just as he did, then it's an illegitimate succession, and England will continue to have a usurper king. And the fact that all evidence suggests that this new king is a wastrel instead of him, who tried really hard to be a good king, but just things went wrong because God hates usurpers, is very scary to him. And so he sort of brings up this specter of Richard II unkinging himself. I think he's doing it with the goal of scaring Prince Hal, but he only thinks it will be so scary because he finds it so scary. But fortunately, Prince Hal is able to pull off this exquisite piece of rhetoric, saying, if I affect it, meaning the crown, more than as your honor and as your renown, let me no more from this obedience rise. And this is another step in the Bildungsroman arc of the Henriade. In Henry IV, Part 1, Prince Hal had to demonstrate his effectiveness in war, and he does this by killing Hotspur. Here he has to demonstrate his effectiveness in peace, or in diplomacy, by using his words to achieve his ends. And he needs both of these skills in order to be successful when he is king in the play Henry V. He spends most of that play fighting, but in the final act, he needs to use rhetoric and diplomacy. But enough of all that deliciousness, we do have to talk about Falstaff for a little bit. So Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1 is clearly unhealthy. But in Henry IV Part 2, we see him more as diseased in addition to unhealthy. The language of disease infects his scenes. Did you see what I just did there? So the first time we see him, his first line, he's asking about like whether his water, which is urine, is healthy. His page responds that the doctor said the urine was healthy, but the man who produced it was not. Falstaff is short of money. He even attempts to ask for a loan of £1,000 from the Lord Chief Justice, which goes about as well as you would expect. And he refers to his financial state as consumption of the purse. He jokes with dull tear sheets about venereal disease, and the soldiers he is offered have names like moldy, feeble, and wart. And Falstaff's illness puts him on the same track as King Henry IV, who is also sick. Henry IV was only 45 when he died, so he's really dying of disease and not of old age. And it is kind of necessary that these two get on the same trajectory, because the same event that separates Henry IV from Prince Hal, namely his death, will be the act that separates Falstaff from Prince Hal. When Henry IV dies, Prince Hal will become the king, and Prince Hal has known from the beginning that he can't be king and keep up his friendship with Falstaff. And if you were a director who wanted to do a super high concept production of this play, I don't know why everyone is looking at me, you might consider having Falstaff, wait for it, don't laugh too hard, be imaginary. This does work because Falstaff was not a real historical figure, so maybe he's a real historical figure in that he is Prince Hal's imaginary friend. He was real fictionally, and so when King Henry IV is dying, Falstaff also has to be on the route to dying. Their fates are sealed because once the king is gone, Falstaff also has to be gone from Prince Hal's life. Have I sold you on it? Probably not. So that's all I have to say about the main contents of the play, but we do have to talk about the two, really weird parts. What is going on here, kids? And those are the prologue and the scene with Prince John. So the prologue usually gets cut from modern performances because it's weird. Enter Rumor, painted full of tongues. A guy walks out with tongues painted all over his body, and probably a suit with felt tongues coming off, because rumor is spread by words. So what's going on here is something that I've talked about with the other history plays, and that is the mythification of English history. Shakespeare is trying to elevate the actual history of England to the mythological history of Greece and Rome. So you've got this personification of an abstract concept, which is the sort of thing you would find in classical literature. In fact, you do find Rumor as a figure in definitely the Aeneid, kind of want to say Metamorphoses as well. So Rumor comes on as this kind of cool looking ploy to grab your attention, and also to remind you of what happened in the previous play in case you don't remember, or you didn't see it, or you were too drunk to pay attention. And so she tells us that there has been a fight between the side of the king and the side of the rebels, and that the main thing you have to know is that Prince Hal killed Hotspur. And this is going to be driven home to us in the next scene because there's initially confusion about who has killed who, but we eventually make it very clear that Hotspur is the one who is dead, and Prince Hal is the one who killed him. But is that true? Remember in my last video how I talked about Hal sort of assuming the identity of Hotspur when Hotspur dies, because he knows he can't maintain this wastrel persona he's got going on, and he needs to be more like Hotspur, and so he sort of assumes his identity, and he does this in multiple ways. Go watch the video. So in some ways, the initial report that is given to Northumberland is true, that Prince Hal is dead because the person that everyone has assumed Prince Hal to be no longer exists. And the person that Hotspur was assumed to be, and in fact was, he's a pretty straightforward dude, continues to exist, but now in Prince Hal. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. We see Prince Hal transform again at the end of this play. He says to his brothers, don't be afraid, I will be both father and brother to you. So he is once again taking on the identity of the new person that he needs to be, and that is his more serious father. This also ties into the concept of the two bodies of the king, which, honestly, I've thought so hard about, and I still don't fully understand. But so the king has one body, which is his physical body, and then there is also the body of the king, which is an abstract concept, which is always existing. And so the minute that one king dies, the new king becomes this, like assumes this body, the ethereal body of kingship. And this is why when a monarch dies, you say the king is dead, long live the king, because both of those statements can be true at the same time. He says, "My father is gone wild into his grave, for in his tomb lie my affections." Affections here means more like affectations in modern English. "And with his spirit, sadly, I survive, to mock the expectation of the world, to frustrate prophecies, and to raise out rotten opinion, who hath writ me down after my seeming." Also, a little bit earlier in that scene, the Chief Justice had cast Henry as his father, saying, imagine you were your father and you had a son who acted the way you did, and then judge my actions based on that. So here we have Prince Hal being cast in the role of Henry IV by the Chief Justice, instead of being cast in the role of Henry IV by Falstaff, which is what happened in the sort of set piece scene from the previous play. So that's that, and I guess that means we are closing out the video with a discussion of Prince John being an ice-cold motherfucker. So just to clarify that sequence in case you misunderstood, Prince John and the rebels have both assembled their armies and they're getting ready to fight. They do the traditional parley before the fight, one side sort of hoping that the other will just surrender so that they don't have to fight. And Prince John says, yeah, let's have a chat. So he gets the leaders of the rebel party over to his tent. He says, look, I don't want to fight. Let's just kiss and make up and be friends. You disperse your army, and I will disperse mine. Yeah. And then once his enemy's troops are dispersed, he calls his own army and says, thank you very much, you are arrested and you will be beheaded for treason. And what a change this is from the way combat has been portrayed in the two previous plays, which showed much more chivalry. Think of Bolingbroke and Mowbray like as knights in shining armor, you know, duking it out for the chance to defend the honor of their king in single combat. And then Prince Hal challenging Hotspur to single combat in Henry IV Part 1. In that scene, Shakespeare focuses on this as sort of an act of mercy or compassion, because if those two just fight each other, then the rest of the armies don't have to fight and they can spare the lives of all of these common soldiers. While that is also true of this scene, Shakespeare chooses not to focus on it at all, and in fact focuses on the brutality of Prince John ordering the execution of the rebel leaders without a trial. And this sort of scene is meant to show the transition from the medieval world to the modern world, which Shakespeare was a part of, albeit the early modern world. And in the modern world, wars are often solved in boardrooms, or board tents, as it were, instead of with lots of people actually dying in the field. And when you walk away from this scene, I think you're supposed to think Prince John is very effective, but you're not really supposed to like him. But good news if you missed all of the big battles. In the next play, Henry V, we will have the biggest of battles. That's not true, but we'll have a very big battle, the Battle of Agincourt. So look forward to that. I will hopefully get that video out in the next couple of weeks, because this video is very late. This is supposed to go up in April. I'm still gonna try to get my Henry V Bard Book Club video out before the end of May. So have fun with your reading, and I will see you soon.